everybody, I'm Yvonne Williams with Back to Earth Creations, and in this video I want to show y'all how to make a purse that at the time of recording I haven't made yet. So far I have our pieces of leather cut out. You could use any kind of leather that you have, like even a garment leather or an upholstery leather or something, like a upcycled leather from like a trench coat from Goodwill. So many different materials, and you could also use foam or thermoplastics or any kind of fabric with a stiff interfacing based off of this pattern. There will be links down in the video description to where you can purchase this pattern from my Etsy store, and then use it as a foundation to leap off of and do all sorts of different designs of bags. Oh, hey puppy. Today I am using, this is an embossed vegetable tanned leather. It is like 1, maybe 2 ounces, quite thin, very supple, but what's really cool about it is it came pre-dyed, so less work for me, and also it has this really cool pattern already embossed into it that makes it look like alligator or dragon hide. And then here we have about a 4 or 5 ounce, again, vegetable tanned leather. What's really nice about vegetable tanned leathers is you can get it to look like chrome tanned or suede, or you can get a lot of different effects with it, but it does things that these other styles of leather will not do, which is reabsorb water and let it be tooled. This is another project that I'm currently working on. And you can see all of this 3-dimensional design with the leather carving. We're actually saturating the leather and then stamping and carving and, arting the design into it. And so I'm going to go over how to do that today as well. And so that's why I prefer to use vegetable tanned leather, because we can do all sorts of different stuff. It also paints, burns, and dyes really, really well. So let's go ahead and get this flipped around. So I have gone through and used, this is just some freezer paper that I was actually using to stain. It was scrap freezer paper. And I laid it on my big side of vegetable tanned leather, used an ink pen, which is super shoddy work. I usually will go through and use like an awl or something, but I couldn't find my awl. So I used an ink pen and then just trimmed along the outside using some heavy-duty leather shears. You could also just as easily use a nice sharp box knife, but on this, this was a softer piece of leather, so it was just as easy to cut by hand. And the first step that I'm going to want to do is bevel our edges. And there will be links to all of the different tools and materials used in this video down below. Some of these tools I purchased almost 10 years ago, so they might not have exactly the same, tool listed, but it's something that does the same job. So here you can see bevelers come in all sorts of brands and sizes and shape, but they all perform basically the same thing. And that is, I'm going to zoom in a bit so you can see. We're going to come through and take our squared off edge and just slice a little bit off. That stuff composts really well, so I actually save a box of it and then just toss it out into the compost. So you could get a light beveling, see how it did there, or you could come through using a much bigger tool. And sometimes on these bigger ones, they just won't pick up the material. Oops. And so here I have a slightly smaller one. We can just come through. Oh, and that slice is so nice. So this one you can see, slightly different design. It has this nice groove in it, and I feel like it rounds off pretty nicely, but just use whatever tools that you have. I've also seen people use sandpaper and just sand down their edges, or go through, with a knife and kind of bevel it. Watch out for your hand. You don't want to ever bleed on your merchandise. And so just very firmly, gently, carefully coming through. And I'm going to go through and bevel on the front and back my entire piece here. But I'm not going to bother on this thinner leather because honestly, for one, it doesn't really need it. For two, I don't know, I kind of feel like it would just be making more work for myself without really getting much of a result. And we're going to be doing some lacing around the edge of this, so we don't really even need it. So let's bevel our edges and then I'll meet you all right back here. we have all of our edges nicely beveled. You'll notice my leather is still completely dry. I haven't done any kind of moisture or casing or anything on it. So I'm going to go through with just some water from the sink and very lightly, like I don't want to make it soggy. Okay, so I guess not very lightly. But I am just going to mist it. And this can cause water spotting. I'm actually hoping that it will, because I really like the way that that can show up and give some different detailing and stuff. If you don't want water spotting, use a sponge, get everything evenly damp. But I really hope that it gives me a nice, well, except for that where I messed it up. So a really nice gradient. And so if you don't want water spotting, just go ahead and re-wet it thoroughly every time. I personally am not very good at doing a nice even stain job, so I just try to make it look like I did it messy on purpose. So it's your own artistic preference. So here I have something called a craft aid. It is just a piece of flexible plastic that has this edge ridge, like kind of raised up off of it. And this one, again, I'll have links down in the video description. But this one has some really great choices of some different knotwork designs, but I really like these corner motifs. And what I'm going to do here is, we could have it just positioned perfectly and have it to where it, you know, isn't really lined up with the edge of our bag, but I'm going to experiment just a little bit with tampering with that. And to use the craft aid, you want your leather just a little damp, and I'm going to be using this modeling spoon. And so from here, I'm going to take this and line it up with the edge of where I've beveled. And then I'm going to come through and just trace over these lines, trying to make sure it's almost like taking like a grave rubbing, if y'all have ever done that. But it's like, instead of having a piece of paper and a crayon or a, you know, charcoal, I'm just rubbing every surface that I can, and I'm stopping it like the midway. So I'm going to lift that up, and you can see it is very lightly imprinted the design onto the leather. And this is a great alternative for people who are like, I can't draw. So though I do encourage folks to get their hands a bit dirty and experiment with hand drawing some of their own designs as well. So I'm going to line this one up, focusing on having that point lined up right there. And again, just gonna go, stopping at the midline, and bringing it out that way. And so now from here, I'm going to take the other end of our modeling tool, is just a ballpoint, and I'm going to draw to make it look like it was supposed to be that way all along. So just reinforcing that line, and then bringing this one across, maybe with a little bit of a curve. And just to give it all the sense and feel of my hand, and to familiarize myself with the knot, if this is your first time working with Celtic knotwork, that can be a really good idea, because what we're doing right here is very temporary and can be fixed. So any mistakes that happen at each phase, I'm going to try to show you guys examples of how we can fix that in the next step. So anything that gets messy here, we can tidy up whenever we go through and do the cutting with our swivel knife. Anything that gets messy with our swivel knife, we can go through and tidy up with our tools whenever we do our tooling. Bork goes the doggy dog. Sorry, they're very offended that we have neighbors. So I apologize for the Borkity dogs. Hey Z. It's okay. You're just a dog, honey. He's like, but Mom, I'm a dog. And I'm like, yeah, I know, man. It's rough. Get it? Sorry. I kind of punned myself just then. I'm sorry. Y'all didn't sign up for this. You're here for leatherworking. Okay, so we have traced over that. And now I'm going to pick the knot that kind of lines up with it. And line this up. Try to get those ends to where they match up, and kind of extend it up this way. And again, I'm going to stop at the halfway point. And this takes me to a point where I do prefer my own hand-drawn knotwork, because what I would normally do is just trace out our template and then draw the knotwork to where it's scaled exactly to the right length and the angles and everything. But if you have a craft aid and you want to, make use of it, this is a great way to do that. Then I'm going to mark just a little bit right here on that tip, because you can see we can follow this around. And then I'm going to lift that up. And so now what we can do, while the design is fresh in my mind, is train this around where it does kind of just a little leaf end. And that's a great way that we can just kind of stop the design midway instead of having it trail off the end. And then we might be able to put like a decorative corner motif or restart a design or just whatever you like. And so I'm going to go through and I'm going to do that same thing on the other side. So we have our knot, and I'm lining this up. And so you've seen it once, so I'm just going to do the same thing, but off camera, and then I will meet you guys back here for the next step. If you're deciding to use your own drawn templates, because you can see that those craft aids really make getting a lot of design down on the leather quickly, easily, but we can position out our own knotwork that we've drawn. And usually, again, I'll go through with the whole template and draw everything on the template, and then like tape it down and trace everything all at once instead of doing it in layers. That way I can make sure that the spacing is as nice as I can get it. Like this one, I mean, it's not perfect, but that's kind of my style. Just saying. And so I'm trying to line up, looking at the tips of my knotwork, making sure it's about ½ inch away. That's about ½ inch away. Need to shift over just a hair. Okay, and so this was just printed out on regular computer paper off of one of my templates to the digital download content on my Patreon, but I really recommend freezer paper because it has a waxy backside, and that way it doesn't stick to your leather. But if you don't have that, you can still get pretty good results with computer paper. So you can kind of lift it and you can see how I'm just drawing along the knotwork with the ball tip. I'm careful to not use pens at this time, because if it punctured the paper, it would leave ink on the surface of the leather, and that stuff can be kind of hard to stain over. So that's just something to keep in mind. Coming through, doing all of our knotwork. And I've found that it does make it a little bit easier if I follow the ribbon of the knotwork instead of, kind of haphazardly picking different spots. But it's more about the end result and less about how you get there, so you do you. There we go. Not sure if I'd already done that line or not, but it doesn't hurt to double do them. And there we go. So now we have another knot inside, and I like the difference between a bigger knot, a smaller knot, a bigger knot. I don't know, you can really do a lot of different things. And so now when the purse is closed, it's going to look like this, which I think is going to be neat. And so now the next step is I am going to fill my sink with water, hold this under until the bubbles stop, and then let it start to return back to about this color, where it's not completely dry, but it's not soggy either. That's something you'll kind of have to just get a feel for. You can accomplish very similar results by just saturating it with the spray bottle, but I'm going to go case it, and then I'll meet you guys back here. So I had started to use a filigree point because I thought I might enjoy that better, but it's designed with its sharply angled blade to cut very deep and thin into the leather. This is a great blade to use for if you wanted to carve out, and like maybe if you wanted to carve all of the negative space out, and leave the ribbon where it can kind of, to where light can come through. But my favorite blade to work with is actually this very, like, just wide, big, bold blade, because it gives a really nice deep line, deep and wide. And I just like the way that it travels through the leather. It could just be that it is what I am most used to. But I'm going to come through, and as opposed to as I did in the time lapse and kind of following the ribbon around, I'm going to come through and actually travel opposite to the way that I had drawn it on, because I find this much more efficient. I come through and do from one direction, and then I'm going to go through, turn it a bit, and do each of these lines. Being very careful that my lines don't intersect. Whenever they do, like up here was a bit messy. I was should have warmed up on a different piece of leather, but I was impatient. So, but yeah, being careful that they don't intersect. And then I'm going to come through. And I'm less comfortable turning this way as opposed to this way. So by all means, find where your comfort zone is and turn your leather to suit that. Now, that's not saying that you should never challenge yourself and push the boundaries of your comfort zone, but on a piece that you're wanting to do really good work on is not the piece to practice on. And so we're just going to keep coming through. And I do try to follow the design around, but so you'll notice, in a lot of my leather working time lapses, there's a whole lot of me just rotating the leather, but keeping my hand in relatively the same position. So that's why that happens, is because I want to be making my cuts where I feel like I have the most control. And you don't have to use a swivel knife. You could use a craft blade, an X-Acto knife, or whatever you have, but I really feel like I have the most control coming around some of those curves. But again, it is so much less important about what tool you're using or what technique, and more about the final result. You want something that's going to last a long time. It's going to stay beautiful through the lifetime of the piece, and it's not going to break you in the process of making it. That way you can make more pieces. So I'm just going to continue through and do all of the cuts on all of the knots, and then meet you guys again back here for the next step. I am going to put it into like some super duper time lapse, maybe. I don't know, the super fast time lapses can get a little headachy to watch. So if anything, I'm actually probably not going to do a time lapse on this one. I don't know, as soon as I say that, I'm like, but I really want to do a time lapse. Just let me know what you guys think down in the comments, though. Yay time lapse or no time lapse for future tutorials? Because y'all are the ones watching this, so I just want to get to make it. So, yeah, meet you here in the next step, guys. At this point in the design, we have cut all of our lines, and we could just go ahead from here and dye it and do the finishing steps, but I am going to add some more layers of detail with the use of this textured beveler. And you can see how it's angled. It has a shallow end and a deep end. I line the deep end up with the edges of my lines, and I'm just going to hold this, line it right up with the edge. You don't want to overlap it and you don't want to be too far away. And also be mindful that you're not crossing into other ribbons of your knotwork or your lines of your design. And then using a rawhide mallet, just tapping, and it kind of jumps it. If you're new to this, you can just tap in place. And you'll see I kind of place my pinky on the surface, and that gives me a little bit more room to be able to maneuver. Gives me a little bit of stability as I just ease and encourage it around. So I'm going to do this a whole lot. I'm going to try to catch some time lapse of it so you guys can get a pretty good idea, but and also for troubleshooting, and again, I tool the same way I did the cuts. I'll go through and do all from one area, and then I'll come in from a different angle. If you're doing this and you're like, that's a little less desirable than like that, or if you're tooling and you have too much weight over onto one side, then it can make it, leave some odd bite marks. And so, but the good news is we can just go through and retool over that. And I like to have it, and this can be a design element, that you take into consideration, to where I do the ribbons that are going under first, and then have the ribbons that are going over. And I feel like that just gives us a nicer sense of what's on top and what's on bottom. But that's the magic that happens in the very fine details. So if you're going to get nitpicky, go ahead and get nitpicky. But for the most part, I just like the texture of it. So, and I've never once had someone who's not just genuinely being a jerk come through and be like, ah, right there, you did that one first instead of that one. And it's like, really? So, but I also try to not be too critical of other people's work either. So we're just going to do this a whole bunch. So it is much later in the evening. You can see our leather has dried back to its original color, but you can tell it's still damp because it's very cool to the touch. So it's not quite, bone dry the way that it would be maybe in a day or two if I let it continue drying. But this is a pretty good time to stain it. I have gone ahead and measured out a 20-inch gusset. You can have this be however shallow or deep as you would like. I'm making this bag specifically for sale at Dragon Con, so I wanted to make sure that you could fit, you know, a bottle of water, some snacks, your cell phone, your wallet, your keys, you know, some basic essentials in it. You know, it's not, you know, a diaper bag, but you'll be able to hold quite a bit of stuff. And then I've gone through and stitched the edges. It's a little uneven right now on these ends because I haven't attached it yet. I'll be doing the finishing there at the end, but I'll show you guys when I'm sewing it to the back and the lid flap of the bag how to do that lacing. Because you could also do just a saddle stitch or a basic, you know, loop lacing, or even rivet it. So, but first, before we do that, I'm going to stain this using dark brown EcoFlow Gel Antique. You want to go ahead and have it nice and shook up. You could use something like one of these, you know, terry cloth sponges, or just a regular sponge, or some daubers, or some wool, you know, sheepskin kind of stuff. I like to just use my gloved hand, but I am going to have some pads of paper towel ready that I will be spritzing with water. And I really enjoy this technique for applying an antique gel because I feel like it helps spread the gel as much as possible. And I'm putting quite a bit on my hand. Oh, and dropping a glob there on the leather too. And I am super generously just rubbing this in and around, getting it in all the little nooks and crannies of our tooling. Now, antique gel is something that you want to be very generous with, because like how I dropped a glob, that would have left a spot, except for I'm putting just as high of an intensity all over all of my other leather too. Now you could use butcher paper to stain on top of. I'm using just more freezer paper. I don't want to have to be storing spools and spools of all sorts of different kinds of, you know, tracing film and butcher paper and, you know, whatnot. So I just find one thing that does all the jobs and then store a bunch of that. So again, and you can see this is a really thick, like waxy, pigmented dye. That's okay. I wouldn't recommend, you know, painting fine details with it, but it's great for slathering all over a piece like this. And now I am going to go ahead and do a bit just scraping what's on my hand and rubbing it in on the edge, because this top edge here is not actually going to be laced, only the back from like here down and around. So from here, I flipped it over, and I like to lower the intensity of the stain on the back. So I've applied it and squirted a bunch of water, and this just helps kind of spread it a bit. It dilutes it down. But I don't have any details that I want to bring out. I just want to cover up the base leather color. You don't have to do this part, and on a lot of my pieces I don't, especially if it's something that comes into direct contact with skin, like the inside of a bracer or a corset where somebody might be sweating quite a bit. But I do think it gives it a really nice finished look. And it also uses up it uses just a little bit more pigment, but it gives you an opportunity to wipe off all of the excess pigment off of like your gloves and stuff. So again, so much of with leatherworking is what you put into it as an artisan. And I feel like if I'm going to put this much time and energy into something, I'm going to feel very, you know, proud and pleased of the final result. Okay, so now from here, I'm going to wipe the excess off of my gloves so I don't leave smudgy little fingerprints all over everything. You can see that's not really a whole lot to waste. But now is the part where it really shows through. Getting our pad of paper towel damp. I'm going to go through And I'm just burnishing off the excess. This does help kind of close the pores on the leather, even though this is the flesh side, which is the, you know, not smooth side of the leather. Flip it over. Get a fresh pad of paper towel. And I like to spray onto here because I don't want to dilute the stain that is settled into all of our details. And I'm just going to come through, and you can kind of see it's starting to brighten it up a bit. But it's removing a lot of that surface pigment. And then we'll fold. Get a clean pad, clean part of the pad exposed. And really start just buffing it out. I'd say a little bit of elbow grease, but really it's a lot of elbow grease, but it does go a long way. I'm not entirely certain why it's so dark right there. Sometimes those things happen. Fortunately, it is on the back side. But I've had sides of leather where I've used one color of stain, and it'll be like 4 different colors across the expanse of the piece, just because different spots on the hide may soak in more of the pigment or may repel more of the pigment. And sometimes I'll see that I missed a spot. I just dip my finger into the bottle and rub it down in there. But again, if I were to spray the water directly onto our work surface, or onto our piece, it would dilute all of the stain that is settled into our tooling. Okay, I'm going to need another square of paper towel. You can really go through the paper towels on this, but it's worth it because the more you burnish and lighten, the nicer of a result you're going to get. Just cleaning up that surface. And I've also found this technique for staining ages really nicely. And now I'm going to let this dry before adding any, you know, sealing or anything. I like to seal using Aussie wax, but you could also use the acrylic Resolene or Super Sheen or anything like that. But I'm going to let this dry. And I'm also going to, while it's damp like this, I'm going to let it dry up a little bit because I don't want to risk, you know, lifting any of that pigment out of the tooling. But before sealing or anything, I am going to go ahead and finish my edges. So let's let this rest for a little bit. Oh, I missed a spot. No, I didn't. Yeah, I did. Arguing with myself about whether or not I missed a spot. So yeah, we can just come through, make sure it's all, making a mess with my paper towels. There's no reason at this point to cut any corners. Okay, so we're going to let this dry, and then I'll meet you all right back here. Also, while our leather is still a bit damp from doing the dye job, before I've put any kind of anything on it beyond the antique gel, I'm using this Halo Blue Gold Lumiere paint by Jacquard. Shook up real nice. Now, this paint dries flexible. It can be used on, you know, leather, fabrics, all sorts of stuff. And I'm just going to be functioning out of the cap. I'm going to start away from myself and then paint towards me. And I just picked a random brush out of, it's a, what kind of brush this is? Like this kind of brush. Honestly, I would have preferred like a smaller tipped round brush, but this is what I grabbed. So, and I'm just going to come through and catch the surfaces of the knotwork. Just dipping, wiping, I mean just very little bits of paint on my brush at any given time. And then we can actually fade it in a bit. I kind of only want to be doing like the highlight, the very tops of the tooling, not where they interlace underneath each other. So I'm just going to keep kind of carefully applying pigment. But the reason I'm starting away from myself is I do not want to drag my arm through this at all. And so I'm going to keep doing this. I might get some time-lapse footage for you guys. And then, whenever it's all dry, we'll come through and do the edge slicking. We have finished up our paint job, and this was actually, I had a little bit of a disaster. I had finished all of it. It was the closest to perfect of anything I've ever done, and I'm not even exaggerating. And then I dumped paint directly right into the middle of it, just and it was while I was screwing the cap on, like it had gone on sideways, and that's what I get for working tired. But I was able to scour it off mostly. It only scuffed it up a bit. And then I had to go back through and basically repaint it. So that was frustrating. But good news is it's dry enough now that we can slick the edges. So I just have a brick of plain old beeswax. Like you can see, I'm just a mess. And so I'm going to be taking this. I'm actually just going to put a light layer on all of our edges. Now, there's a lot of different products on the market that you can use. Gumtregen, I don't know, can't pronounce it. That stuff that's intended specifically for slicking edges. Some folks just use water. I like using the beeswax. I feel like it gives a really nice feel and look to it. So I've rubbed it on there now. Let's see if we can't zoom in a bit so you can see how that's looking. And then I'm going to go through with our slicker tool and I want to melt it into the edge of the leather. I start on the thinnest one I can fit into and then continue up the settings. Well, or up the different grooves. And you can see how that edge is looking now in comparison to that one. That's an unfinished edge. You can still see the fibers and the pores. Whereas on a slicked edge, we have a nice, really smooth surface. And so I'm going to do that on all the edges. And honestly, beeswax mixed with the smell of vegetable tanned leather is probably one of my favorite crafting smells. Now you do want to be careful though. You don't want to be putting down border lines with your slicker. So again, that's what I get for working tired, just getting messy. You can see these slickers will accommodate up to a very thick leather. I've never actually come across a leather that I couldn't fit into this slicker. And then also, we can come through with just some blue jean. And just pinching, making a little groove with our fabric. And that will burnish it down really nicely. And that's probably one of my favorite ways to burnish down the edges of a thinner leather or a flimsier leather. And it'll just seal and melt in anything that might have been missed. Can really focus on spots. Oh, you can go off camera. Now, the next step is going to be, I am using, this is just a sponge covered in terry cloth and some Aussie wax. And I have actually put about a teaspoon of lavender oil in with this. And I absolutely love the way that it smells. I call it my lavender leather balm. And I don't know, I really liked the addition of that little bit of smell to the Aussie wax. No negative side effects that I'm aware of, except for that it smells nicer. And honestly, the wax smelled great on its own, but it smelled a little almost medicine-y. Whereas with the lavender in there, I think it smells a little bit more like just really pleasant. Strong though, super strong. And so I've just dipped some, and it's tinted black from so many projects that I've done. And I'm just going to go through and stipple it onto the surface of our work, because you don't want to just lay one thick glob in any spot. And I'm going to start buffing this in. And this is going to protect and condition our leather. Keep it from cracking over time, help it repel water. And then also, to make sure that nothing's settled into any of our tooling, we can come through with just a regular, this is a horsehair polished shoe shine brush. And I find it's really great about getting down into all those nooks and crannies. And I think it also serves a really great purpose for also burnishing shut the pores of the skin side of our leather. Then we can come through with our blue jean. Trying to make just a little pad, give me something to grip onto. And now we can buff this up to a fine shine. You can see it's only taken a little bit off. And this is just one of countless ways to finish your leather. So if you have a favorite way, do that. But this is how I like to do it. I enjoy the results that it gets. I enjoy doing it. And then also on the inside, the horsehair brush is another great way. I just get a little bit there on the bristles, stipple it out just a bit, and then buff it in on the inside. And I feel like it helps accentuate where the tooling had happened, and makes it, I think, just as pretty on the bottom side in its own way as what it was on the surface. Not too shabby. Okay. So now from here, the next step is going to be, make sure I don't spill anything else this evening. We can go ahead and shine this up as well, get it all smelling the same. Now this leather here that I used for the gusset was actually just, you can see how the oils will darken and bring out a lot of the detail. This was an old deerskin skirt that I'd gotten at Goodwill, actually, like, gosh, maybe 8 years ago. And I just kept it for, you know, kind of scavenged scrap leather. I think I got the skirt for like $1, you know, on one of their sales. Because some of these, you know, thrift stores, they'll just throw everything out for, you know, oh, it's clothes, it's $1, you know, or $1 or whatever. And then they have their sales. So they, you know, I was able to get once a 100% silk skirt for like $1. It was amazing. The thing had seemed like it had just had anti-gravity properties, because it just floated in the wind, in the slightest of wind. So, and I cut it about 4 inches wide and 20 inches long, and then went through and did our stitching. So now what we're going to want to do is see if we can't line up just as perfect as we can the edges and if you wanted, you could go through with a contact cement and attach our leather gusset to the back panel first. I like to kind of line up the middle. And then what we'll do is we'll start from here at the center point, and I'm going to use the same punch that I used to do these holes. And then I'm going to stop just a little shy of where I think it's going to end up, because I don't want to punch too many holes, and we can always go in, you know, whenever we get to that point and add in a few. So to do that, we're going to have our cutting board. And this is the 4-prong chisel that I was using. Let me actually zoom this out just a bit, because I don't want to be hitting my camera again. And I give myself a 1/4 inch seam allowance coming in from the edge. If you're not good at eyeballing it, there is a tool called a wing divider that you can set to your width and then come through and like mark the edges, but I just eyeball it nowadays. And then you position it and hammer it through, and then I line up the first hole with the last hole and then keep it, you know, lined up. And if you ever have, you know, want it to go a little easier, I've just scraped some beeswax on it. You can also dip it into your Aussie wax. And that helps it go in and come out easier whenever you're working on your leather. You definitely want to make sure, though, that it is making a nice full contact through to the other side, because there's nothing like having to redo the same work twice. And, you know, yeah, you've got the little chisel marks punched, but you still have to go through and punch it with an awl just to get your needle through. So save ourselves the future work, and just go ahead and get them punched all the way through. But you also don't want to be, you know, embedding it so deep in your cutting board that, you know, it won't come out. So I'm going to continue punching. the rest of the way around on both sides. And then I'm actually gonna, I already punched the holes on this one, so it's gonna seem kind of redundant, but I'm gonna go ahead and count and make sure that I am lined up here. That way I can go ahead and start doing the stitching. But then I'm gonna stitch the same exact way as we did on the front here to the back side. And then our flap will come down like this. And I'm not entirely certain yet what kind of closure I'm gonna have on here. I think a snap would look really nice, but there's so many different ways to close a bag nowadays. We'll get to that when we get to that. So the next step before I do too much more is I need to get straps cut for this bag. I actually use as a template the strap from a very loved but decrepit purse that I finally just had to scavenge all of the hardware off of the purse, but I did keep the strap because I really liked the design of it. And it has this adjustable slide, so you can take it from about 45 inches from end to end to half that length. And this was like some kind of weird assembled vinyl faux leather that's just disintegrating, but I really liked that design. And so to always remind myself of how it is, I keep this. Now I am using this very light ounce vegetable tanned leather that has been embossed because I want the strap to match the front of the bag. And I'm using this tool called a strap cutter that you can actually see I lost the washer, so I'm just using an old scale that was already scratched up to clamp it in place. But you can see it has this ruler here on the inside, and I'm gonna adjust it to fit. I have 1 1/4 inch these strap slides. That's what they're called. So I'm gonna set it to 1 1/4 inches. Gives it a nice wide strap, which I find bites into a shoulder less than, you know, like a thinner strap. But also, I'm not setting it to a full 1 1/4 inches. I'm setting it to, it looks like just a solid 30 millimeters. So just a hair under, and that's because I want the straps to move freely. I don't want it to be the full width because then it fills it up a little too much. Now I'm going to angle this down. I'm actually going to get a completely different camera view. Okay, so we're down here a little bit more leather level. You can see I have it set to the width. There's a little blade that comes through right here, and I'm going to line up our end. And this can be really difficult to get started sometimes, especially if you have like a softer, you know, garment leather. So sometimes I'll just try to mark the end with the blade that's in there, and then I'll start it off by cutting it with some scissors. So I've marked it, bringing it around, finding that little cut, and just giving it a little sliver to get hold of. And that was not the right spot, apparently. Wrong cut. Okay. And I want to give it enough length that it will, you know, give me something to hold on to through the other side. So see how that's come through? There's just a little bit hanging. And so I'm going to grab that. And holding on to this part, I'm keeping the leather level against our strap cutter. Clearing the path. And there we are. We have a nice long, evenly widthed strap for the most part. It's wonky on one side from where I cut it with scissors, but I'll often go through and use a whole side just for strapping. I'm only going to get like, you know, 3 or 4 out of this one because I do want to use it for other things also. But I'm going to cut some more straps and then I'll meet you guys back at the workbench for the next step. To do the strap attachment, here I have just some 5-ounce vegetable tanned leather that's been stained dark brown. And I'm going to come through, and I want enough that I can comfortably fold and rivet kind of right there, because I want this to be able to hang either off to the side or vertically for if it's a shoulder bag. And so I'm only going to be doing one rivet, that way it still has the, you know, the mobility. Or you could even have it to where it hangs down. Just, it makes it so much more versatile if you just, you know, have that option. So it looks like I'm going to need about, marking it with my fingernail. You can see that left just a little scratch in it. That gives us about 5 inches. So I'm going to come through, place my punch that gives it a nice tapered tip. And I actually need to lift the tripod quite a bit because, and I'm going to try to do this off to the side here, that way I'm not hitting the tripod. You can hear that shaking everything on my work table. Now it doesn't always come all the way. That's because I cut the strap just a little wider than what I had intended to. There we go. Just trimming that up. I'm going to turn this around, position that again, and not hit the tripod. There we go. And I do like to stain the whole thing first. Ah man, that came out kind of weird. That's not very centered up at all. I'll have that be the back side. So lining that up, marking in my fingernail, placing the tip, getting a little bit of a better line up this time. Put that into the compost bin. There we are. We can clean up those sides a little bit. And now we can come through with our die. That's the wrong color. I was gonna say that felt way too full. And I'm just using an old sponge to get a little bit on the tip. And just kind of finishing up those edges. Bring the camera in much more now. And it only takes a little bit. And you don't have to use a sponge. You could use a gloved hand or a paintbrush or a dauber or a Q-tip. Or again, with so much of this, it's not necessarily about how you get there, just that you get there. Okay. So there's that. And now I'm going to be using, this is going to stack up quite thick. So I'm going to be using my large rivets, and I want it to have enough room to move. So I'm using smaller, a 5/32 inch punch, very large. Normally this is way bigger than what I would ever use for rivets, but I really want to make sure that it has a lot of movement. So again, bring the camera up. A messy work surface. And I'm just coming in centered up from the tip and edges. Eyeballing it. And for the template, if you purchased from my Etsy shop, I'm going to try to have these straps in there, but by all means, like, you could totally do a longer loop like probably double it in length, and then attach it like this and have a belt, you know, go through it. You know, there's so many different ways, infinite ways that you could really personalize this to get it to be exactly like how you want. This is just one of many ways. Place an A punch in. And so now we would bring that around. And I want to get the positioning for these straps on the back. So I'm going to be using my awl to mark. And I think just right there will be pretty good. And so coming in equidistant from the other side. Could use a ruler, but I'm not about that life. And just marking. So those will be where we punch our holes. I lost my hole. There it is. So just placing. There's that one. Don't mean to be off camera, but I don't want to hit the tripod with my hammer. So just like that. It brings it through. Now the only time you can use as bigger of a hole punch as you want, you just want to make sure that your hole punch isn't bigger than the ends of your rivets. And honestly, I really wouldn't go much larger than that 5/32 because this leather was cut from the center of a side, so like very close to the back, so there's not very much stretch to it, but I would, you know, worry about over time the holes stretching and possibly the rivet pulling through. I don't think this is going to have that problem, but something to keep in mind. And now also, while we're in a hole punching mood, I'm going to be using a snap closure for on this piece, just because I didn't have any other closures on hand. And so I want to position and see. I think I'm going to do the snap. Let's see how it would look. Do I want it there on the tip, or do I want it up here? I think I'm going to do it here on the tip. And again, that's entirely up to you. So I'm going to be using, this is the size punch I normally use, which is so scuffed up, but it looks like it's about 1/8 of an inch. Making sure I'm not overlapped on my gusset or anything, making sure everything's nice and lined up. My center line, same distance from the ends on each side. I'm going to line that up. Bring the camera up so I don't hit the tripod. And go ahead and hammer through both layers of leather. And again, if I wanted a tighter close, I could have brought it all the way down, but I did want to show off a little bit of this cool, you know, hide. And to give enough room that whenever it's closed, you can actually have some stuff in the bag. And so also, before I start attaching the back, I want to go ahead and install my snaps. So we have, that's one of the back pieces. Let me bring this tripod back down. The spring's got a little wonky on it, so now it keeps wanting to spring back up. So we have that and the dish, and then that's one of the top caps right there. Oops. Come back. Where'd you go? There we go. And one of the caps that's the wrong part in it. Yep. Okay. So you can see we've got male and female ends here. That one goes inside that one, but I don't recommend snapping them together because they can be really difficult to get back apart. And you can put, interchangeable. You can have the male end be on the bag or on the flap. I personally like to have the part that it clips onto on the bag, but that's just a personal preference. I don't know if there's any actual benefit to it. It's just, for as much as I'm inconsistent in my work, that's one thing that I'm like, I'll just do it like this from now on. So, and then, well, that's not the right, there it is. You can see how it has that little nippled end. And so I'm just gonna set that in the anvil. Feed that through. Put that over top. Layer that on. Coming off to the side a bit. Make sure I don't hit the camera. You can check underneath to make sure everything's nice and centered. And I actually do prefer to do this just flat on the table. I do use the shaped, domed anvil for whenever I'm doing the top snap. But I don't want this to pucker my bag. It's going to lay flat, so. Really whack the heck out of it. And it still has a little bit of wiggle. This is super thin leather for this purpose. Oh no. And I just put it on upside down because I'm a dork. Oh no. Okay. Troubleshooting. So I did it completely wrong. I'm going to come in. Fortunately, there's a little bit of space here. And I'm just going to start cutting this off with some really janky wire snips that I'm not that worried about messing up. Oh man, I hate whenever I just like, oh, I know what I'm doing. So there's that. Now I do want to be careful to not be cutting up or messing up our leather here on the front. So I'm going to come in, if I can reach with it. These are actually probably a little crappy for, yeah, I've got like a broken spring and the tips don't really come together all the way. Let me grab a different pair. Fortunately, I knew where another pair was directly off the top of my head, and so I'm just going to come in. You want something a little bit sharper that'll actually cut the metal, because the idea is to get this piece out of the way so that we can get through to the stem. There we are. This bag has been all sorts of trouble for me. Or rather, I've been all sorts of trouble for this bag. And so just pinching it, bringing it together. Just like I'm gonna have to scrap that whole metal piece, bottom part, but I just want to be able to salvage the bag. There we go. Okay, so that pulled out. Ta-da! Done. Okay, take two. So there's the end, and there's the end. And instead of flipping it over like that, I'm going to do it proper this time, where it sits like that. Silly mistakes, but fortunately they aren't project ruiners. Okay, laying it down proper this time. This is one of the, installing your hardware is one of the ways where it does kind of matter how you do it. Because that end result though. Okay, so still zoomed out, so I'm not going to hit the camera. Actually have it placed on correctly this time. Oh, that goes so much better. There we go. So now you can see, nice flat on the back. Nice attachment there. And now put on our cap through to the front. And I think that centers up nicely. Lay it in our form. Put the top on, grab our tool. Again, double, triple check in that everything is actually lined up the way it's supposed to be, because I do not trust myself to just get it on the first try anymore. Okay, lined up, and start hammering. There we go, nice and secure. Set those off to the side, and now test it. It snaps on real nice, snaps off real nice, holds. I think that's going to do exactly what we wanted it to do, and that is hold the bag shut. Very cool. Okay, so now to install the straps. I have one strap, two straps. I'm going to dig out some rivets and then I'll meet you guys back here. So I have some extra large rivets and some caps. It's not as important that the rivets match as it is that the caps match, because sometimes, especially whenever I've spilled a bag or something in the drawer and they get mixed together, I'm just like, ah, this'll do. So placing our rivet, zooming in so you guys can hopefully get a better idea. And these are quick rivets, so they have kind of a bare open back. So I'm just going to lay it on our pounding surface, feed it through the leather. I'm going to go ahead and get our welded rings put through here, and then placing it, and then placing the rivet cap. Then using a rivet setter, it has a flat side and a rounded side, like a concave side. We're going to put that on there, and then hammer it. There we are. You can see still has a nice swivel. Same thing on the other side. Feeding it through the back. Hooking our ring through. Feeding through one side, feeding through another side. Putting our cap on. There we are. And then hammering it. Something to avoid, sometimes it'll dimple a little bit. If I could get my hands on a rivet setter that were just a little longer, because this one I always feel like about that close to hitting my knuckle, and I don't know how many times I've bashed my knuckle instead of the rivet setter. So if that happens, fortunately it's not on the front. It still is going to hold really well. And whenever we tell people that we do the lifetime repairs, the first things I look at to be repairing are the lacing around the edges, these strap connectors, and the strap itself, because that's where they bear the brunt of their wear and tear. So, but that's going to be really cool. It'll be able to attach as a purse, as a messenger bag, zoom out, or as a belt. Super cool. And so now the next step is to go ahead and start lacing on our bag, our gusset to the back side. So to do that, I am using a flat lacing needle, which you can see has these really neat little prongs, and some this is, what measurement is this, 3/32 leather lace. I really like the half round lace as opposed to like the flat stuff, because you can see, like from Tandy, yeah, 3/32. This is listed as Supreme calf lace. But it doesn't say half round, but it does have a little bit of a rounded surface. It's not quite so just flat and bulky. It has a very thin profile, but it's a little thicker in the middle, or at least it feels that way. And I'm pulling off a full arm span and a bit. I had found that it takes, for this, it took me about 12 feet of lace to get it completed all the way around. And then I'm taking a craft knife. Let me see if I can. I'm not hammering right now. And I'm laying the craft knife on the table and then pulling it towards myself. And that's getting us a really nice taper that we can then open up our lacing needle, place that inside, just as deep as it'll go, lined up so that we don't have pokey outy bits. And then I'm going to set this on our table and just get those spines in the lacing needle stuck in there, and that's going to hold it really nice. And so you can see there's a wrong side, like an underside, and a top side that has a nice shiny finish to it. You can have whichever side you like facing out. I just recommend being consistent about it, and I go by feel more than anything, and so I have the smooth side out. So I'm going to call it the top and the belly, or the underside, so hopefully you know what you mean, or what I mean whenever I say that. Excuse me. So I'm going to have the underside facing me, and then I'm going to feed through our hole like that, again with the lace facing me. If you're using a round lace, which this design does look really great using a round lace, you don't have to worry about this at all. You just kind of go for it and then pull it through. And right now I'm only working with one layer of the leather, and I'll show you why. So I'm pulling it through until we only have about 1.5 to 2 inches of tail. Then I'm going to take our awl and press through to enlarge that hole just a little bit. Pulling back out. And now I grab where the lacing is exiting the leather, holding onto our tail, and pull out. And what this is doing is it is eliminating all those little twists and potential knots and headaches that we're going to be just avoiding right from the get-go. Then I'm going to grab that needle and travel around through our gusset, then holding both of those out of the way, pushing back through. And so now hopefully there won't be any tangles in our leather. It can be a little hard to pull it through. And if you're having a hard time with that, don't stress your hand out, just get some pliers. And again, I just drop the needle and then just pull my lacing through. And it looks a little bunched up, but we're just going to take it and pull it, and check that out. It's a nice little loop. I'm going to keep this tail coming off to the right. I am right-handed, so I often travel from left to right, but you do you. Pull it down and in. And now, again, I've grabbed where the leather is, or where the lace is exiting the leather, pulling all the little twists out of it. I really recommend getting in the habit of doing this if you're doing a lot of lacing with flat lace, because it will make your life a little easier. And so I'm going to come in from that angle. See how it's, now ignore our tail here, but coming in from below and exiting this way, and I want to keep my lace to the left of my needle. Nope, that was wrong. So if you miss stitch, just insert back in, pulling all the way back through, and that's what happens whenever you don't straighten out your lacing. So again, grabbing at the base, following all the way around. Sorry, I know it's going off camera a lot, so That'd be coming through. There. There we are. So from right to left. So we're going to do that again. Grab your lacing at the base of the needle, or at the base of the leather, follow it around to the needle, and then coming through our layer of gusset leather, and then coming through the back side of our purse. I'm gonna get some lighting going here. There we go, that might help. Coming around to the back side. And what we've done is we're encasing our tail here. Oh, and the printer woke up. So pulling that through. Pulling it around. And now from here we are going just like this. See how that's positioned? So for that first one, I've locked it down. That gives it a nice taper off into the rest of the work. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. And then coming in from left to right. And so now, and again, there's so many different ways to start this off. You don't even necessarily have to do that lock on the first one. You could just do a whip stitch and ease yourself into it. Okay, through our gusset, through our leather, keeping everything out of the way. Pulling through. Encasing that tail, and then I'm going to grab it and pull. That way there's no knots. Then just bringing our needle through like that. And then we get to do this like a bajillion more times. So it's nothing if not repetitive. So if you don't have the hang of it yet, don't worry, you'll get to do it. Lots more practice. So again, I just drop the needle, grab it, pull it through, just pulling it through my fingertips, keeping it nice and flat until I grab the needle, and then I bring it through both of our layers of leather, pull it through, pull, 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 drop it, pull it through. And I'd rather add that extra step of dropping it and straightening the lace than having to deal with getting knots and stuff. Because if you don't, I'll actually show you here on this one. Even if it looks like it's bunched up, just grab it and it's actually not bad. Oh, and the camera raised itself back up. That's great. But if I don't pick it up and straighten it, you know, let's say it got a twist in it, and so we're feeding it through. Where'd my hole go? There we are. Pulling it through, and we're pulling and pulling and pulling, and already you can see the shiny side is up, and so I know it's had a twist in it. And so to fix this twist that we have here, I'm just grabbing it on both sides, and this is really hard on the lacing actually, so I prefer to not have to do this, but I just twist and kind of force it through forward and back, trying to get it to be the correct side up. And that can be really difficult to do. So oftentimes what I'll end up doing is just back lacing, just being like, either removing my needle and pulling it out, or you know, threading back through the last stitch. But we can focus, if you don't want to have to do that, we can focus on just one layer at a time, get it straightened up through the gusset. Okay, and that's the right side up. And now get it straightened out through the back side. And it's just not wanting to. So if you're new and you're not very good at getting it to be flat lace, I do, like without twists, I do recommend using a round hole punch as opposed to a flat chisel, because it'll give your leather a little bit more room to move, so you can fix your twists better. But I really do recommend just getting into the good habit of preemptively removing any twists. There we go. So you put your needle back on and then keep on stitching. So I'm going to keep doing this, and then I'll meet you guys back here when I run out of lacing, so I can show you how to splice more in. Whenever we've come to the corner, to get around it evenly, I'm going to do in the stitch of the corner and the one right before it, I'm going to do 2 stitches. So this is my last single stitch before going on the round, making sure there's no twists in my lace. Bringing that through. And so to make it a little easier on ourselves, since we know we're going to be putting multiple stitches through these 3 corner stitches, so there's the one before it, the one of it, and the one after it. Go ahead and open those up a little bit, untwist my lace, press through, do our loop, and now I'm going to feed down back through that same exact hole that we just previously laced through. Now again, if it's hard for you to get that needle through, feel free to use some pliers. I just wiggle and pull. Pulling it down. Pushing through. I could have gotten away with rounding this a little bit more, or at all, the tip there, but I want to show you guys what happens when you leave the point on there. Just bringing it around. Oops, got a knot in our lace. So just drop everything, pull it back out, start back at the leather, and pull through. Now back through that same stitch that we had just done. It's quite tight, but just be patient with yourself and the project, you'll get it. And so now, rounding that bend, going through our gusset. This is our first stitch of the last duplicated hole, like double hole, I guess. And then one more through that same hole. And you can see prepping it with the awl really makes a big difference, I think, for sure. And since you're not removing any leather, it will shrink back up on itself. And there we are. And then we go back to doing just a regular old single stitch through our gusset and through our thicker leather. And so you can see, you can choose to do different patterns of stitching here on the corners, because this one I find gives a really nice flat corner. Whereas if you do 1 and then 2 and then 1, you can see it curls it in a little bit more, which I preferred for the front of the bag. But neither is wrong, they just get different looks and different effects. So, gonna keep stitching along. Keep on stitching, stitching, stitching. We are coming now to the end of our lace, and the way that I'm going to do this is you don't want to have too little lace. You know, you need at least a needle's length just to be able to bend around and get to where you're going. So whenever you have just a little over the length of your needle in lace left, I'm going to come through just the gusset layer and thread back through underneath these laces. Like you can see, I'm between the two layers inside of these guys. So like on the inside, you can see there's no lace or anything protruding. And I do recommend using some pliers here. Grabbing the needle and just pulling through. And that keeps that tail encased. And we'll come back and trim that in just a moment, but I have some more lace prepped, same as we did before. I'm going to open up our lacing needle, get that in there, tap that down. It's in nice and securely. And so now from here, I'm going to feed in from the inside through our next hole for lacing, which it does not want to go through. Where did my awl go? So we can just take it and open up that next hole. And again, making sure that the right side of the lacing is facing correctly. So pulling through. And just like how when we were first starting, checking and making sure everything's still correct. Giving myself just a little bit. And that's going to get pulled off in that direction and then encased in our gusset. So I've set my lace down, grabbing where it's exiting the leather, and pulling, and pulling. And now I'm going to continue on as though we had never you know, made any kind of addition or anything. So we're just bringing through, pull, 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 all that extra material. And you could work with, you could splice every couple of inches, like splice in some new lacing, but I prefer to just do it in like 2 goes. But again, it's personal preference here. Making sure that there aren't any twists coming in. And again, making sure that we're going to encase this lacing here. And it actually looks like it's lining up a little oddly. Did I miss a stitch? No. So I'm actually going to, especially since we're close to the tip here, just kind of carry on. There we go. Oh, close to a corner. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the 2 stitches, 2 stitches, 2 stitches as we did before, all the while making sure that this tail is encased. And then I'll continue around and I'll show y'all how to finish it off whenever we get to the end of our gusset attachment. We've come now to the end. We have 2 holes left, and so I'm going to lace regularly, just like how I normally would. Coming around and then into our last stitch. It's very exciting. Pushing through. And now we have this end, which what I'm going to do with this is feed down. You can see how that needle's coming through. Then we're going to sweep around and push up and through to like right there. Just backtracking. The same way that we did whenever we were splicing in. And then I'm going to grab it with my pliers and pull on through. Then cut just as close as I can. And that is the gusset on our bag. And so now whenever it closes, you can see it'll hold quite a bit of stuff. But it also packs down really nice and flat whenever it's empty. Very supple. I like it. I like the way that this garment leather gathers whenever it crumbles. It gets crunched up. Okay, so now to attach the straps. We have about 60 inches of our strap. I'm going to go ahead and shape the end just with our punch. Moving off to the side again so I don't whack the camera. Doesn't take a whole lot to get through, but again, this is just a little wider than what my strap's just a little wider than my punch is. So I'm just going to come in and trim back those sides. And the hardware that I'm using, I wanted this to be able to be easily put on as a belt, so I'm just using this swivel hook. And I've trimmed this down to where it'll slide in and sit like that. So now, sorry, adjusting the camera. I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to take a hole punch, line it up right there, punch on through that. I'm going to leave that there to keep things lined up while I pick a rivet. And these are small rapid rivets. Scooch this off to the side. Find my rivet setter real quick. There it is. Remove my punch. Slide in the stem of my rivet from the back side. Before I set this, I think I should address the other end. It may make no difference, but I just want to double check. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to thread through on this side, and I'm using, where did it go? This strap slide, And so this is going to get fed up and through. Aha, I'm glad I did this first. This end needs done first. So with our strap slide on there, lining that up, putting that there. And you could reinforce with a bit of contact cement, or you could do stitching. There are so many different ways that you can do the connections on straps. I prefer just a simple, straightforward rivet. Putting that on there. Bringing it to the edge of my work so my strap slide can just sit comfortably. Set that rivet. And now this end will get threaded through here and then here. And so now you can see that is going to remain adjustable while we now will come through and attach our end. Feeding the rivet through from the back, setting the cap. There we are. And follow the strap around, and now you can leave it hooked and just wear as a purse, or you can adjust the strap and put it around your body. And I really like having the option to clip it. That way you don't have to be like stepping into it or threading it over your head. You can have it set to however you want and then just hook it on. You could also use like a belt buckle, would look super cute, or lots and lots of different options. But guys, there we are. That is a leather belt, pouch, bag, purse. Also, I'm probably going to go through and stain the back side of this and seal it up nicely. I may actually go through and stain it a nice green or paint it just to see how the Lumiere paints hold up. But honestly, I should have stained it before assembling it, but well, maybe next time. Hey y'all, thank you so much for hanging out with me for this video. I really hope that it was helpful to you. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas, please leave those down below. There will be links to the tools and materials that I used down in the video description also, and everything through, like, those are affiliate links, so anything and everything that you purchase through those links greatly benefits our company, which I really appreciate. Camera's out of focus, but this is how it came out. Super pleased. I love that gusset. Just really nice. I love the strap style. Wishing I had gone through and stained it, because now it's going to be a bit of a hassle to have to like get in between things to stain. But let's go ahead and try it on. So at its full length, we just pull on that strap and we pull on that strap, so it's at its full length. And for reference, I am 5'4". A little short for the camera apparently. And you can see it sits, I mean, that's a super comfortable. You can rest your hand on it. You can clip all sorts of other things onto these loops as well. You can keep it in the front for whenever you're walking through crowds, keep your stuff safe. And then also as a belt, I'm going to size it in a little bit. Just slides through. The leather's still pretty stiff, so it's taking a little bit, but we just open it, wrap it around ourselves, and clip it on. Ah, that's super cool. This way your shoulders will be nice and free, and a nice hip bag that again you can thread other things through to have a nice little utility belt or festival belt, just however you like. So I am super pleased with this, you guys. The template for this will be up for sale on our Etsy, but also, links down below, it will be available to my digital download tier on Patreon, along with all of the Celtic knots that I've drawn out. That way you can just print them and use them in your work however you like. And then, yeah, so you can questions or anything, leave them down below. Requests for future tutorials. I love hearing from you guys. If you have a purse style that you'd be interested in seeing me make or figure out how to make, or a different, like, kind of maybe something more tribal next time instead of just Celtic knotwork, even though I do really like Celtic knotwork. Also, if you enjoy my free tutorials and would like to support the creation of more of them, as well as participate in all of the different things that we do here at Back to Earth Creations, please consider joining us over on Patreon. Pledges start at just $1, and the more you pledge, the more you get. But I also post quite a bit of stuff that's free to everybody who has a Patreon account, so that's pretty cool too. But thank you guys again, though, so much for hanging out with me. I'm going to go put things in my new purse. So happy crafting, y'all. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.